June 28, 1919. Versailles Palace. The German military is being executed on paper. No army above 100,000 soldiers, no tanks, no military aircraft, no submarines, no general staff, no heavy artillery, no military academies. The Allies aren't just defeating Germany. They're making it impossible for Germany to ever fight again. Allied inspectors will monitor every factory, count every rifle, destroy every stockpile. The treaty isn't harsh. It's surgical. Germany's military isn't restricted. It's forbidden. Here's what they're allowed. A police force pretending to be an army. 100,000 men with rifles. That's it. But fast forward just 20 years. September 1st, 1939. 3 million German soldiers pour across the Polish border. 3,600 tanks. 4,000 aircraft. The most advanced military coordination the world has ever seen. In 6 weeks, Poland, defended by 950,000 soldiers, ceases to exist. 1 year later, France, the nation that wrote the restrictions, falls in 46 days, from forbidden army to continental superpower, in 2 decades, while bankrupt, while hyperinflation destroyed the currency twice, while Allied inspectors watched every move. The question isn't why Germany went to war. The question is, how did a nation with nothing, no tanks, no planes, no officers, no money, build an army that conquered Europe before anyone realized what was happening? The answer is going to change how you think about military power. Because Germany didn't just rebuild their army, they built a shadow military that existed in the gaps of what was forbidden. They trained tank commanders without tanks, built an air force without planes, created a general staff that officially didn't exist. And the method they used, secret Soviet training facilities, disguised civilian programs, and a financial scam that made war economically inevitable, turned their greatest weakness into their deadliest advantage. Here's the disturbing part. The restrictions that were supposed to cage them actually forced them to innovate beyond everyone else. While Britain and France kept their old armies and old thinking, Germany was building something entirely new, not just rebuilding, reinventing. By the time the world realized what was happening, it was already too late. The Forbidden Army was real, and it was unstoppable. This is the story of how you build a military that doesn't officially exist, how you train soldiers for weapons you're not allowed to have, how economic desperation creates the most dangerous innovation, and why, by 1939, Germany didn't choose war. The system they'd built required it. If you're fascinated by the hidden mechanisms of history, the systems and secrets that shaped the world we live in, hit subscribe. Because what you're about to learn isn't just about World War II. It's about how constraints force innovation, how desperation creates danger, and how sometimes the cage becomes the weapon. Let's start with what the Allies thought they'd done to Germany in 1919, and how spectacularly wrong they were. The Treaty of Versailles was not just harsh. It was designed to make German military power impossible forever. Look at what the treaty actually said. Germany's army, limited to 100,000 soldiers, total, including officers. For context, France maintained an army of 700,000. Britain had 370,000. Germany, a nation of 60 million people, got 100,000. But it wasn't just the number. It was how they could recruit them. No conscription, only volunteers. Why does this matter? Conscription isn't just about filling ranks quickly. It's about creating the infrastructure for mass mobilization, training facilities, registration systems, reserve officer programs, medical examination protocols, the entire bureaucratic machinery that lets you turn civilians into soldiers. The Allies removed it all. Every volunteer soldier had to serve 12-year terms. Officers, 25 years. You couldn't cycle men through, couldn't train reserves, couldn't build a pool of combat veterans who returned to civilian life and could be recalled. Then the weapons restrictions. 0 tanks, 0 armored vehicles of any kind, 0 military aircraft, not trainers, not reconnaissance planes, not fighters, nothing. 0 submarines. No heavy artillery above 100 Feindwürfe. No poison gas. No anti-aircraft guns. But here's what really crippled Germany. No general staff. The general staff wasn't just a planning body. It was the institutional brain of the German military. The place where strategic doctrine was developed, where officers were educated in the art of large-scale warfare, where mobilization plans were created and updated. The Allies dissolved it completely. Germany was allowed 2 military academies, 2 compared to dozens before the war. No staff college, no war college, no place to train the officers who would plan and coordinate modern warfare. The Rhineland, Germany's industrial heartland, was permanently demilitarized. No troops, no fortifications, no weapons production. Allied troops would occupy it for 15 years. And to make sure Germany obeyed, the Allied Control Commission. From 1920 to 1927, Allied inspectors, British, French, Belgian, Italian, moved through Germany counting rifles, inspecting factories, destroying weapon stockpiles. They showed up unannounced at military bases. They audited ammunition inventories. They monitored chemical plants. When Germany fell behind on reparation payments in 1923, France occupied the Ruhr, Germany's industrial core, sent 60,000 troops in. The message was clear. We're watching. We're serious. Step out of line and we'll crush you again. The logic was airtight. You can't train tank commanders without tanks. You can't build an air force without planes. You can't plan modern warfare without a general staff. You can't mobilize millions without conscription infrastructure. The Allies had surgically removed every tool Germany needed to rebuild military power. On paper, it was perfect. A cage designed to be unbreakable. But here's what the Allies didn't understand. When you tell someone exactly what they can't do, you give them a roadmap of what to hide. Enter Hans von Seeckt, Chief of the Army Command from 1920 to 1926. Aristocrat, professional soldier, strategic genius, and the man who would turn Germany's weakness into a hidden strength. Seeckt looked at the 100,000-man limit and saw an opportunity everyone else missed. Other German officers were furious about the restrictions. They wanted to resist, to rebuild as quickly as possible, to violate the treaty openly. Seeckt said no. We're going to obey the letter of the treaty. 100,000 men? Fine. But those 100,000 men are going to be something the world has never seen. He called it the Führer here, the leader army. Here's his insight. A normal army has a pyramid structure. Many privates, fewer sergeants, fewer lieutenants, fewer captains, and so on. That's because you need more workers than leaders. But what if you inverted that logic? What if you trained every soldier to be a future leader? Look at the math. A typical army, 1 officer per 30 enlisted men. Seeckt's Reichswehr, 1 officer per 25 men. Doesn't sound like much. But now look at the training. Every private was trained as a future corporal. Every corporal trained as a future sergeant. Every sergeant trained as a future lieutenant. Every lieutenant trained to command at the company level. Every captain trained to command a battalion. Every officer trained 3 ranks above their current position. Why? Because Seeckt knew the 100,000-man limit was temporary. When it ended, when Germany could expand, this army would become the officer corps of a force 30 times larger. By 1933, Germany had 4,000 officers among its 100,000 soldiers. When expansion came, those officers already knew how to command at scale. You weren't promoting inexperienced men to lead divisions. You were activating leaders who'd been training for that role for a decade. Other nations could add soldiers. Germany added leaders. But Siecht went further. If Germany couldn't train openly, it would train in disguise. Sports clubs. All across Germany, athletic associations teaching young men camping, orienteering, physical fitness. But the instructors? Reichswehr veterans. The exercises? Small unit tactics disguised as team sports, aviation clubs, the Deutscher Luftsportverband, German Air Sports Association. Officially, teaching civilians to fly gliders for recreation. Actually, training future fighter pilots. By 1933, Germany had 5,000 trained pilots who'd never officially touched a military aircraft. Police forces. The Weimar Republic maintained state police forces, Landespolizei, that were far larger than needed for civilian law enforcement. Why? They were organized like military units. They trained with military discipline. Many of the senior officers were former Reichswehr men. When expansion came, entire police battalions would transfer directly into the Wehrmacht with their command structure intact. But the most audacious move? The Soviet Union. In 1922, Germany and Soviet Russia, both international pariahs, signed the Treaty of Rapallo. Officially, it normalized diplomatic relations. Unofficially, it opened the door to secret military collaboration. What the Allies couldn't see in Germany was happening in Russia. In 1926, Germany established a tank school at Kama, near Kazan, deep in Soviet territory. German officers tested Panzer prototypes, developed tank tactics, trained crews, all far from Allied inspectors' eyes. At Lipetsk, south of Moscow, Germany ran a secret aviation school. Pilots trained on fighter aircraft, tactics were tested, dive-bombing techniques developed. At Tomka, Germany experimented with chemical weapons, poison gas that Versailles had banned. The Soviets got German military expertise and technology. Germany got training facilities where the treaty didn't reach. By 1933, hundreds of German officers had trained in the Soviet Union. They came back experts in weapons they weren't supposed to have. Meanwhile, German industry was preparing. Krupp, Germany's largest arms manufacturer, was designing tanks. On paper, they called them tractors. Components were manufactured separately, labeled as agricultural equipment. The designs were perfect, ready for production, just waiting for the word. Submarine parts were manufactured and exported as industrial machinery. Artillery pieces were designed but never assembled. Chemical companies maintained dual-use facilities, civilian products on one floor, weapons production capacity ready to activate on another. And the General Staff? It never actually went away. The treaty had abolished the General Staff by name. So Germany created the Truppenamt, the troop office. Different name, same function. Inside the Truppenamt, officers continued war planning. They updated mobilization procedures. They studied foreign military developments. They created operational plans and code. The institutional knowledge didn't disappear. It went underground. Germany was building an army on paper. Plans, designs, training protocols, command structures, waiting for the moment it could become real. By 1933, when Hitler took power, he didn't inherit a broken military. He inherited a compressed spring. 13 years of preparation, hidden training, secret facilities, industrial designs, leadership development, all of it coiled, ready to expand. The cage hadn't been broken. Germany had learned to live inside it while building the tools to explode outward the moment the lock opened. January 30th, 1933. Hitler becomes Chancellor, and here's his advantage. He did not have to build the system. It was already there. The leadership pipeline, the Soviet-trained tank officers, the hidden pilots, the industrial designs, the secret general staff. 13 years of Siegt's architecture ready to activate. Hitler just needed 3 things: money, manpower, and the political will to openly defy Versailles. For 2 years, he moved carefully, increased military spending quietly, accelerated production. But officially, Germany was still complying with the treaty. Then March 16th, 1935. Hitler made his move. In a radio address, he announced Germany was rejecting the military clauses of the Treaty of Versailles. Immediately, he declared conscription was returning. Germany would draft 550,000 men into a 36-division army. And then the bombshell. Germany had an air force, the Luftwaffe, and it already had 2,500 aircraft. The secret was out. And the world learned that while they'd been watching Germany's 100,000-man army, Germany had been building an air force in plain sight, disguised as civilian aviation. The reaction from Britain and France? Diplomatic protests, angry statements, and nothing. Britain was actually sympathetic. Many British politicians thought Versailles had been too harsh. If Germany wanted a reasonable military for self-defense, well, that seemed fair. France was politically divided and still recovering from the Depression. They weren't ready to fight another war over this. Both nations were in the same trap. Economic crisis. Public opposition to war, military unpreparedness. Germany had timed it perfectly. The gamble succeeded. The treaty was dead. Now the expansion machine activated. October 1935, Germany's first conscription class, 500,000 men. Those sports clubs that had been teaching camping, they became military training centers overnight. Those civilian pilots in aviation clubs, they joined the Luftwaffe en masse. The state police forces, their officers became Wehrmacht officers. Entire units transferred with their command structure intact. The Soviet-trained tank commanders returned from Russia to create Germany's first Panzer divisions. Krupp's tractor designs went into production as actual tanks. The Truppenamt became the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, the high command of the armed forces. The shadow military became real. And here's what shocked foreign observers. The expansion happened without loss of quality. When other nations rapidly expand their military, competence drops. You're promoting inexperienced men too quickly. Training suffers. Discipline breaks down. Not Germany. Because of Siegt's system, every squad leader was already trained as a sergeant. Every company commander already knew how to run a battalion. The expansion just activated pre-existing capability. By 1938, Germany had 2.4 million men under arms. But the officer corps? Still among the best trained in the world. Britain and France could point to their larger empires, their greater industrial capacity. But those advantages were long-term. In the short term, in 1939, Germany had something more valuable. An army designed from the ground up to fight modern war. With leadership trained beyond their rank, with industrial backing ready to mobilize, with tactical doctrine years ahead of their enemies. But soldiers need weapons. Weapons need money. And Germany was still broke. This is where the economic house of cards comes in. While the military machine was becoming terrifyingly real, the financial system funding it was built on fraud. Hjalmar Schacht's Mefo bills, the shadow banking system that hid 12 billion Reichsmarks in debt. Every tank, every aircraft, every rifle, paid for with promises Germany couldn't keep. By 1938, Germany was spending 17.2 billion Reichsmarks on the military, 58% of the entire budget. More than total government revenue had been just 6 years earlier. This wasn't sustainable. It was a ticking bomb. But in 1935, as the conscripts marched into training camps, as the Luftwaffe revealed itself to the world, none of that mattered yet. The Forbidden Army had returned, and it was just getting started. But Germany did not just rebuild their military, they reinvented it. And this is where the constraints actually became an advantage. Britain and France had large militaries throughout the 1920s and 30s. They had institutional continuity. They had the same officer corps that had fought in World War I. That sounds like a strength. It was actually an anchor. These armies were stuck thinking in World War I terms. Trench warfare, static defense, massive artillery bombardments followed by infantry advances. They'd won the last war fighting that way. Why change? Germany had no choice but to change. Starting from nearly zero meant no institutional memory to overcome, no entrenched doctrine to fight against. No generals defending the way we've always done it. It was a blank slate, and Germany used it. The result was Blitzkrieg. But Blitzkrieg wasn't just a tactic. It was a complete operational philosophy born from Germany's constraints. Germany couldn't win a long war. They didn't have the resources. They couldn't match Britain's navy or France's industrial capacity in a prolonged conflict. They had to win fast. Or not at all. So they built an army designed around speed, not just moving quickly, thinking quickly, deciding quickly, striking before enemies could react. First innovation, combined arms integration. In World War I, armies fought with each branch separate. Artillery did artillery things. Infantry did infantry things. Cavalry was basically obsolete, but still existed. Germany said, "What if we integrated everything into a single system?" The Panzer Division wasn't just tanks. It was tanks, motorized infantry, artillery, engineers, anti-aircraft units, reconnaissance, and logistics, all organized to work together as one unit. Every element supported the others. Tanks broke through, infantry secured the flanks, artillery suppressed enemy positions, engineers cleared obstacles, all moving together, all coordinating in real time. Compare that to France in 1940. They actually had more tanks than Germany, but French tanks were spread across infantry divisions as support weapons. They couldn't concentrate, couldn't coordinate, couldn't exploit breakthroughs. Germany's combined arms doctrine meant their units were exponentially more effective than the sum of their parts. Second innovation, communications revolution. Every German tank had a radio, every single one. British tanks? Only command tanks had radios. French tanks? Mostly none. Crews had to communicate with hand signals or by physically getting out and talking. German tank commanders could coordinate in real time. Enemy position spotted, grid coordinates. Instantly, other tanks adjusted. Artillery was called in. Air support redirected. This enabled what the Germans called Auftragstaktik, mission-type tactics. Officers were told what to achieve, not how to achieve it. They had the initiative to adapt, to improvise, to exploit opportunities as they emerged. Compare that to French doctrine, centralized command. Decisions flowed up to headquarters, orders flowed back down. In the chaos of battle, that meant paralysis. German junior officers made decisions in seconds that French commanders took hours to make. Third innovation. Operational tempo, speed as a weapon, not just moving fast, but moving faster than the enemy can process what's happening. Don't attack enemy strengths. Bypass them. Encircle them. Leave them isolated and irrelevant while you drive toward strategic objectives. The goal wasn't to destroy every enemy unit through attrition. It was to collapse the enemy's ability to coordinate, to create such chaos in their command structure that organized resistance became impossible. Fourth innovation. Air-ground coordination. The Luftwaffe wasn't designed as an independent strategic bombing force like the British RAF or American Army Air Corps. It was designed to support the Army. Close air support as doctrine, not afterthought. The Stuka dive bomber became famous, terrifying actually, because it functioned as flying artillery. Ground commanders could call in airstrikes with precision. Stukas would hit fortifications, artillery positions, troop concentrations right at the breakthrough point. While other nations saw their air forces and armies as separate services with separate missions, Germany saw them as one system. And the testing ground for all this? Spain. From 1936 to 1939, during the Spanish Civil War, Germany sent the Condor Legion, volunteer units testing tactics and equipment in real combat. They learned what worked: combined arms, close air support, radio coordination, rapid exploitation. They learned what didn't work. Strategic bombing of cities proved ineffective at breaking enemy morale. While Britain and France watched the Spanish Civil War as observers, Germany experimented. By 1939, German doctrine wasn't theoretical, it was battle-tested. The result? Poland, 1939, 36 days. France, 1940, 46 days. These weren't just victories. They were demonstrations of qualitative superiority. Germany defeated larger forces through better doctrine, better training, better integration. And here's the irony that should haunt the architects of Versailles. The treaty was designed to prevent German militarism. Instead, it created the conditions for Germany to innovate beyond everyone else. Because while Britain and France kept their armies and their outdated thinking, Germany was forced to rebuild from scratch, and they built something better. The cage had become the weapon. But equipment and doctrine alone don't win wars. People do. And Germany built a system that created soldiers unlike anything the Allies fielded. Start with the Hitler Youth. From age 10, German boys entered an organization that was explicitly pre-military training: physical fitness, camping, navigation, marksmanship with air rifles, paramilitary structure. By age 18, when they entered Wehrmacht service, they weren't civilians being turned into soldiers. They were pre-trained recruits who already understood discipline, physical hardship, and military hierarchy. Compare that to British or French conscripts, pulled from civilian life with no preparation, no physical conditioning, no mental framework for military service. German soldiers arrived at basic training already halfway there. Then there was the ideological component. Nazi education created true believers. Soldiers who'd been told since childhood that they were fighting for the survival of their race, that they were superior, that conquest was their destiny. And here's where it gets dark. They took an oath not to Germany, not to the Constitution, but to Hitler personally. I swear by God this sacred oath, that I will render unconditional obedience to Adolf Hitler, the Führer of the German Reich and people. This created a willingness to sacrifice that's terrifying to confront. Not fighting for abstract principles, fighting for a person, for an ideology that defined them. But there was also the professional component. And this matters because it's where the contradiction lives. The Wehrmacht maintained training standards that were simply higher than other armies. Rigorous tactical education at every level. Physical conditioning that went beyond other militaries. Combined arms exercises that were rare in French or British training. Night operations. Live-fire exercises with real ammunition. The motto: sweat saves blood. Train harder than you'll ever fight so that combat feels easier than training. And the culture of Auftragstaktik, mission-type orders, meant German soldiers were trained to think, not just obey. Initiative was expected at all levels. Make decisions. Adapt to circumstances. Take advantage of opportunities. Mistakes made while taking action were tolerated. Inaction was not. Compare that to the British military, where officer commissions were still heavily influenced by social class, where initiative from lower ranks was often discouraged. Or the French military, where rigid hierarchy meant junior officers waited for orders rather than seizing opportunities. The German soldier was tactically educated, physically superior, ideologically committed, and culturally empowered to make decisions. That's a dangerous combination. But we have to hold two truths at once. This was exceptional military effectiveness, and it was built on monstrous ideology. The same training and belief system that made German soldiers tactically excellent made them capable of atrocities. The clean Wehrmacht myth, the idea that the regular German military wasn't involved in war crimes, is exactly that, a myth. Wehrmacht units participated in executions, in reprisals against civilians, in the logistics of genocide. The professional military wasn't separate from the ideological horror. It was part of it. So yes, we can acknowledge they built an impressive military machine, but we also have to say clearly, they built it for indefensible purposes. Capability without morality isn't impressive. It's dangerous. This is why studying this matters. Not to glorify, to understand, to see how systems can create excellence in service of evil, how professionalism can coexist with barbarism, how tactical brilliance can serve strategic monstrosity. The German soldier was, on average, better trained, more committed, and more tactically competent than his Allied counterpart. And he was fighting for a regime that represented the worst of humanity. Both things are true, and that's the contradiction we have to sit with. But none of this, not the training, not the equipment, not the millions of soldiers, happens without money. And Germany didn't have money. So they used crime. We've talked about Hjalmar Schacht's MEFO bills, the shadow banking system that created 12 billion Reichsmarks in hidden debt. But let's connect that to the military specifically. Every tank cost money. Every aircraft cost money. Every rifle, every uniform, every bullet, all of it needed funding. In 1933, Germany spent 1.9 billion Reichsmarks on the military, 18% of the total budget. By 1938, military spending was 17.2 billion Reichsmarks, 58% of the budget. Germany was spending more on military in 1938 than their entire government revenue had been in 1932. That's not sustainable. That's not economic policy. That's a Ponzi scheme. MEFO bills were promises to pay later, but later was coming. The first bills were due in 1939, and Germany didn't have 12 billion Reichsmarks. So where do you get that money? You steal it. March 1938, Germany annexes Austria, the Anschluss. Austria has gold reserves, foreign currency, industrial assets, Germany seizes all of it, uses it to buy weapons, to pay suppliers, to keep the military machine running. September 1938, the Munich Agreement. Germany takes the Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia. March 1939. Germany occupies the rest of Czechoslovakia. And here's the prize: the Škoda Works, one of the most advanced weapons factories in Europe, producing tanks, artillery, small arms. Germany seizes it intact. Now the factory that was producing weapons for the Czech military is producing weapons for the Wehrmacht. The army wasn't just conquering, it was paying for itself through theft. Each conquest funded the next. Austria paid for Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia paid for Poland. This is a plunder economy. Parasitic. Unsustainable without constant expansion. Then there's slave labor. Concentration camp prisoners worked in German arms factories, IG Farben, Krupp, Siemens, building weapons, manufacturing components, mining coal, forced labor from occupied territories. Prisoners of war worked to death in German industry. The bullets German soldiers fired were manufactured by the people Germany had enslaved. This isn't a side note. This is how the system functioned. The Wehrmacht's operational capacity was built on slavery. Even German citizens were robbed. Remember the Volkswagen? The people's car? Germans were told they could save up through small monthly payments and eventually own a car. 200 to 75 million Reichsmarks collected from German savers. How many civilian Volkswagens were delivered during the entire Third Reich? 0. The factory was converted to produce the Kübelwagen, a military vehicle. German workers' savings went directly into Wehrmacht logistics. By 1939, the economic logic was inescapable. MIFO bills were due. The military had cost more than the economy could sustain. Inflation was creeping back. Resources were depleted. Germany had two options. Option 1, demobilize, scale back military spending, try to transition to a sustainable economy. Result, economic collapse, mass unemployment, political chaos, probably the end of the Nazi regime. Option 2, use the military, invade neighbors, seize their resources, pay the MIFO bills with stolen wealth, keep the scheme running. There was no good choice, but there was a predictable one. The military wasn't just a tool of conquest. It was an economic necessity. You can't understand the Wehrmacht without understanding it was built on theft and slavery. And you can't understand why war became inevitable without understanding the economic time bomb was ticking. By August 1939, Germany had built a military that could only survive through use. August 1939, everything converges. Military, 3 million soldiers, modern equipment, battle-tested doctrine, ready to fight. Economic, MIFO bills coming due, inflation rising, resources depleted, government debt exploding. Political, Hitler's ideology demanding expansion. Lebensraum, living space, in the East. Racial conquest as destiny. Strategic, Germany is at peak strength now, but Britain and France are rearming. By 1941, 1942, they'll catch up. The window is closing. Germany had built a military that was ready in 1939, not 1940, not 1941. Now. Hjalmar Schacht, the man who'd created the MIFO bill system, saw the economic collapse coming. In January 1939, he submitted a desperate report from the Reichsbank directors. The report urged drastic cuts to military spending, reduction of expenditures, a balanced budget as the only way to prevent economic disaster. Hitler's response? January 20th, 1939, he fired Schacht. The man who'd built the financial machine that funded rearmament was fired for warning that the machine was about to explode. Hitler's solution: ignore the problem, keep moving forward, Could Germany have pulled back? Let's game it out. Scenario 1. Demobilize the military. You suddenly have 2.5 million men who were soldiers returning to civilian life. The economy can't absorb them. Unemployment explodes. Political instability, economic crisis. The Nazi regime probably falls. Scenario 2. Maintain the military, but stop expansion. You're still spending 58% of the budget on military that isn't generating revenue. MFO bills come due. You can't pay. Inflation returns. Economic collapse. Scenario 3. Use the military. Invade Poland. Seize resources. Use plunder to pay debts. Delay collapse. But now you're committed to constant expansion. You need the next conquest to pay for this one. There was no good option. But there was a predictable one. September 1st, 1939. Germany invades Poland. The Wehrmacht performs brilliantly. Everything, the training, the doctrine, the combined arms, the radio coordination, it all works. Poland has 950,000 soldiers. They fight bravely. They're overwhelmed in 6 weeks. The Blitzkrieg isn't propaganda. It's real. But this isn't triumph. This is the beginning of destruction. Because the system Germany built, the shadow military, the economic fraud, the plunder economy, it could only survive through continuous conquest. Austria, then Czechoslovakia, then Poland, then Denmark, then Norway, then France, then the Balkans, then the Soviet Union, each victory feeding the next invasion, each conquest buying a few more months before economic collapse, until Germany was fighting Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States simultaneously, until the conquests stopped, until there was nowhere left to plunder. And then the system collapsed. The economy collapsed. The military collapsed. The regime collapsed. Here's the paradox that should haunt us. Germany rebuilt the Forbidden Army to avoid being weak, to avoid being vulnerable, to restore national pride after the humiliation of Versailles. But the army they built required war to sustain itself, and war ultimately destroyed Germany more completely than Versailles ever had. The Forbidden Army was rebuilt, but it couldn't be sustained. And that's why August 1939 wasn't a choice. It was an inevitability locked in years before, locked in when Sekt designed the shadow military, locked in when Schacht created MFO bills, locked in when the economic model required plunder. The system had its own logic, and by 1939, that logic demanded war. So let's answer the question directly. How did Hitler rebuild a forbidden army so quickly when Germany was broke? Here's the complete answer. First, secret foundation, 1920-1933. Hans von Sekt built leadership infrastructure disguised as a 100,000-man army, every soldier trained as a future officer. Civilians trained in sports clubs and aviation clubs, officers trained in secret facilities in the Soviet Union. The system was designed for expansion from day one. Second, hidden innovation. Because Germany had to start from zero, they weren't trapped by old thinking. They developed Blitzkrieg, combined arms warfare, and air-ground coordination, while Britain and France stayed stuck in World War I doctrine. Constraints forced innovation that became an advantage. Third, rapid activation, 1933 to 1935. When Hitler took power, he didn't build the system, he activated it. Conscription turned the training pipeline into an army. The secret Luftwaffe revealed itself. Soviet-trained officers returned. Industrial designs went into production. The shadow became real. Fourth, economic crime. MFO bills created invisible money, 12 billion Reichsmarks in hidden debt-funding weapons procurement. When bills came due, Germany paid through plunder, Austria's gold, Czechoslovakia's weapons factories, Poland's resources. The military paid for itself through theft. Fifth, ideological pipeline. Hitler Youth created pre-trained, ideologically committed soldiers. Professional training standards exceeded other armies. Culture of initiative and tactical thinking. By 1939, German soldiers were qualitatively superior. Sixth, strategic window. Germany had to use the military by 1939. Economic system required war. Enemies were rearming. The window was closing. Use it or lose it. The Forbidden Army was rebuilt through preparation, innovation, fraud, and slavery. It was fast because the groundwork was laid in secret for 13 years. It happened despite poverty because it was built on theft. And it led to war because the system that created it could only survive through conquest. Now, zoom out. What do we learn? Lesson 1. Constraints drive innovation. The restrictions that were supposed to prevent German militarism forced Germany to innovate in ways that unrestricted nations didn't. The cage created the weapon. Lesson 2. Systems have their own logic. Once built, the military economic system had imperatives independent of any individual's choices. By 1939, the system demanded war regardless of what anyone wanted. Lesson 3. Preparation compounds. 13 years of secret work enabled rapid, high-quality expansion. The Allies thought they'd prevented German rearmament. They'd only delayed it while making it more sophisticated. Lesson 4. Capability without morality is catastrophic. Germany built an impressive military machine for indefensible purposes. Tactical excellence in service of strategic evil is worse than no capability at all. Lesson 5. Unsustainable systems demand destruction. Military power without economic foundation requires plunder. Growth without sustainability requires constant expansion. Eventually, it collapses. The warning here isn't subtle. Any system built on unsustainable foundations will eventually demand destruction to continue. Military power funded by fraud requires conquest. Innovation without morality leads to catastrophe. The Forbidden Army was rebuilt, and it doomed the nation that created it. Here's what I want you to think about. When a system is designed with internal contradictions, when it requires disaster to function, who bears responsibility? The architect who designs it. Siecht built the shadow military, but he also designed it to expand peacefully if given the chance. He wasn't planning genocide. The leaders who activate it? Hitler weaponized a system that existed before him, but he also made choices. He chose war over collapse. The individuals who participate? Millions of Germans became soldiers, factory workers, bureaucrats in the system. Were they responsible? Could they have refused? Or is it everyone who stays silent while recognizing the pattern? Think about it another way. Was there a moment this could have been stopped? 1919 at Versailles? Maybe if the treaty had been less punitive.